to see so many faces here this morning, particularly friends and family of Pete and Becca. It's wonderful to have you amongst us. This morning, I'm going to be talking quite topically on sacrifice for a number of reasons, and we'll come on to it. But at some point, or many points in our lives, we will experience some form of sacrifice. Now today it's very relevant to remember those that have fallen in war, those that sacrificed their lives for the benefit of others, for the benefit of us. But I'm going to come on to that in a short while. So this morning, I already said, we've had the privilege of being part of the dedications of Jensen and Eden. And as Christian parents, I don't know where they are, somewhere right at the back, I can barely see that far. Pete and Becca, in dedicating Jensen and Eden to God, are acknowledging the need for Him at the centre of their family. They're submitting their desires to God's desires for their kids. They've made a commitment to raise them to honour God. And for those of you that have kids, you'll know that it actually requires a lot of sacrifice, doesn't it? In many, many different areas. Sacrifice can be an uncomfortable concept, can't it, in today, where society would often say you need to put your needs first, and it would encourage you to get out of things as much as you can and seek as much pleasure as you can, make as much money as you can, do everything you can to satisfy your needs and not at all be concerned with the needs of anyone else. After all, nobody's going to be concerned about you. No one else would really care about your needs unless you do yourself. But good parenting isn't like that, is it? Raising kids takes a huge amount of sacrifice. The first thing you do when you bring a child into this world is sacrifice pretty much everything of your own needs and put it over to theirs. And the older members in this congregation will probably say that sacrifice never ends. And yes, there's some knowing laughs there, wasn't there? I'm sure it's very real. But the first thing that we give up when we get a new baby home, isn't it, is time. We give up a huge amount of time. So the endless sleepless nights, the feeding, the changing, the burping, the settling, and repeat over and over again. Finances. Apparently it costs around £200,000 to raise a child to the age of 18 these days. Well, that's incredible. Yeah, you need to think about that. It's a big sacrifice, isn't it? It changes our relationships with others. It removes, we lose many of our personal freedoms. We give up hobbies and our social activities. Either we've not got the time or we've not got money anymore. We often sacrifice what we eat, don't we? I'm sure most of us wouldn't choose chicken nuggets and chips to eat on a regular basis, but if that's what our kids will eat, or maybe it's all that we can afford, then that's what we have to get. We sacrifice sometimes our desires for our other half, as our kids are always around and we've never got any time, any peace and quiet. Our material needs come second, as their material needs come first. It is, though, a sacrifice that we choose. It's one born out of love. We choose to give everything for our kids so they can have a better start to life, prospects, and a better future than we have had. We're willing to give up and sacrifice so much for them, even to the point where most parents would probably say they'll give up their lives for their kids and put themselves in incredible danger, and maybe even in life-threatening situations. Now, I was in Liverpool yesterday, and there's a story a couple of years ago of a father in Liverpool, and he was taking his 5-year-old son to school when his car caught fire. He managed to grab his son and flee seconds before that car exploded into a huge fireball. Toby's not here this morning, is he? Be aware of the dangers of electric cars. He risked his life to save his son because of his great love for him. As loving parents, our love for our children is so great, we sacrifice anything for them. Now, as we heard before we did our 2 minutes silence, we today remember the incredible sacrifice of many lives in wars. A sacrifice that gives us the freedom to live our lives in a safe, open, democratic society. Without the bravery and sacrifice of so many, we may well not have been here, being able to meet today, as Ed said earlier, those freedoms that we cherish. In fact, if Britain had fallen during World War II, many of us may well not even have existed, as our parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents may well not have survived. In World War I, 19,240 British soldiers died in the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Now that's 3 times the amount of people that we've lost in all wars since the end of World War II. 180,000 were killed in World War I, and that's 6%, or it was 6% of the adult male population at that time. That's an incredible sacrifice, isn't it? World War II, 384,000 British soldiers were killed and another 70,000 civilians lost their lives. A huge sacrifice that we should never, ever forget. Now, in September, Jane and I took a trip to London, and we spent an afternoon at the Imperial War Museum, and it's very worthwhile having a trip down there if you're ever in London. And it was incredibly moving to read the stories of huge bravery and selfless actions that saved the lives of many, often at the expense of their own. How bravery in the face of certain death saved so many. Now, especially difficult was the fallen Holocaust. The barbaric slaughter of 6 million Jews is too horrific to talk about this morning. But on top of that, there was another 6 million Soviets, Polish, Romani, Serbs, disabled, non-whites, and what we now call LBGTs, Jehovah's Witnesses, and criminals. The huge sacrifice that many of our armed services made did nothing to prevent that huge loss of life, but it did prevent many more from experiencing this huge atrocity. A sacrifice that we are immensely grateful for, and we rightly remember those sacrifices this morning for those that gave their lives for our freedom, and they should never be forgotten. There is, though, however, one sacrifice that goes above and beyond any of those that we can make. And that is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross some 2,000 years ago. A sacrifice that has brought freedom from the consequences of all that we've ever done wrong, or will ever do wrong. A sacrifice that is everlasting for anyone that believes in him. His love for us is greater than any love we will ever know anywhere else. Now you may well have heard a story before that Jesus told himself, and it's a story that features in the Bible. You can read all about it in Luke 15 verses 11 to 32. Now the story I want to tell this morning is based on this account. It's a story of a well-off family in Middle England. So a father who lost his wife a few years ago, probably around my age, and his two sons that were in their late teens or early 20s. The father loved his sons so much and wanted the best for them both. Now they lived in a large country estate with acres of gardens, lands, farms and other businesses. They had many staff who took care of everything that they owned. They wanted for nothing. The boys had been to the best schools that their father could afford, and the prospects were really good. Now the first son, he wanted to please his father, and he thought that he needed to earn his love. He worked very hard to achieve this, thinking that if he was really good, he would deserve his love and the love of his father. His father's love, though, was unconditional, regardless of his son's work and achievements. The second son, though, he was selfish, and he thought only about himself. He looked at the estates and the land, the businesses, and he thought to himself, I won't need to work or do anything if I could have my share of the inheritance now. I'd be set for life. I could do as I please. The only thing that stands in the way is my old man. If he wasn't around, I could do what I please with all of this. But he thinks to himself, if only my father was dead, then I'd be free. So he comes up with a plan to get his hands straight away on what would be his in the end anyway. He goes to his dad with this plan and he says, you know how half of the estate and all these businesses and everything will be mine? And his father replies, yes. Well, says the son, you know, with all the change to the tax rules since the budget, if we wait till you die, the tax man's going to take a huge chunk of what you've worked hard for all these years. If you sign it over to me now, then I will have nothing to pay. The tax man's not going to take it. So the father thinks that's actually quite a good idea, and he agrees, and he signs over half of the land and the businesses and all the holdings to his son. But as soon as they're in his name, the son sells them all, banks all the cash. If that's not enough, the father gets up the next morning, finds his son is gone. He's nowhere to be seen. He's cleaned out all his things, and he's taken his passport. The father has no idea where he's gone. He tries phoning, texting, tries to connect on social media, but his son's blocked all means of contact. He has absolutely no idea where he is. But despite all that the son has done, his father still loves him with all his heart, and he hopes that one day he may return. Meanwhile, this second son has arrived in Ibiza. He buys himself a nice villa with a lovely pool and a red Ferrari because he's always wanted one of those. But his dad would only let him have a cheap old banger. He spends his nights partying in the clubs and bars, drinking champagne and getting high on drugs. He gets a different girl every night, and he develops quite an entourage. He freely splashes the cash wherever he goes. Now, after some time living the party lifestyle, the bank balance looking a bit sparse. So he goes to the bank and he takes out loans against his house and his car. And he thinks nothing of it, carries on partying and doing just what he's been doing. But then one morning, very early, there's a knocking on the door, and it's the bailiffs, and they've come to take everything away. The house, the car, his jewellery, in fact all his possessions, he's completely bankrupt. They even take his mobile phone. He's left with no money, the clothes he's wearing, no means of contacting anyone. His so-called friends now want nothing to do with him, as he doesn't have anything to offer them anymore. He's left on the streets with a drug habit, no shelter and no food. Eventually he comes to his senses. He remembers his dad's staff are paying well and they all have somewhere to live. He thinks that maybe if he goes home and he shows his dad how sorry that he is, and he tells him that he's been such a fool, then maybe, just maybe, he'll give him a job. Even if it's the worst job on the estate, it must be better than this life. He doesn't even want to be called his son anymore. He just needs a job and a roof over his head. So at that point, he makes his mind up to return. He hitchhikes back across Europe. Meanwhile, while he's still some way off, his dad hears that his son's been spotted heading back towards home. His dad's really excited. He thought his son was dead. He's so overjoyed to hear that his son is alive that he gets into his car and he sets off to look for him. And when he spots him in the distance, he parks up, he gets out of his car and he runs to him. The son says, "Dad, I'm sorry for everything I've done. I can't be called your son anymore." But his dad hears nothing of it. He loves his son so much that he embraces him. He kisses him, takes him straight home, cleans him up, cuts his hair and his beard, gives him new shoes and clothes, and he puts his grandfather's gold watch on his wrist. He then throws a massive party to celebrate that the son he thought was dead is alive and returned. Now you may or may not be able to relate to this story, and it's a retelling of the prodigal son from Luke 15. It's the story of God the Father and of mankind who have turned their back on God, gone their own way and done their own thing, living their lives without even a thought that God exists, doing everything that they want to please their own desires. The reality is, though, nothing in this world can ever bring true fulfillment. Not money, not power, not drugs, sex, possessions, hobbies, interests. Nothing will ever bring real fulfillment. Our true identity and purpose can only be found in Jesus and being part of the family of God. Sons and daughters living in the fullness of God's love. When God created man, what he created was perfect. But when evil entered the world, that perfection was broken, and there was a separation of man and God. Man turned his back on God and went their own way. That evil that came into the world we call sin. Now God is 100% good, and good cannot coexist with evil. So there became a separation of man and God. And here's where we come back to the original point on sacrifice. God's Son, Jesus, took it upon himself to make a way for mankind to come back to God. Like the Son in this story. Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross that all of our sin, everything that we've ever and will ever do wrong, was taken on him and taken to the grave, so that we can return to God perfect and blameless and free of sin and evil. All we have to do is to come back to him, acknowledge that he did this for us and believe in him. It's free. We don't have to earn it, like the first son thought. He thought he had to live a certain way, or behave a certain way, or do certain things to earn his love. And that's one of the biggest lies that we're told today. We don't have to earn God's love. Jesus died that we may come to God and live in his love freely. It's not about what we do, it's all about what Jesus has done. The greatest sacrifice of all time. I just invite the band to come back up. They're going to play in a moment. So if this morning you've identified with the second son, or maybe even the first son, then there's an opportunity to make a choice. You can continue to deny that God exists in your life and live a life without him, an eternity without him. Or you can choose to step into freedom, to come home to the Father and live a life and an eternity free of all that comes with the sins and the wrongs that you've ever done. You can step into a life of purpose, meaning, and of consequence. Now, if you want to choose that return home, and I'm just going to say a prayer, and you can pray along with me in your heart. Lord Jesus, I'm sorry for all that I have done wrong. I acknowledge that you went to the cross and died that I might be free of all those sins. I believe that you rose again and that you are the Son of God, and I give my life to you today. Amen. So if you've prayed that prayer today, then come and tell someone. On your chairs there's also some booklets called Why Jesus, and there's some contact forms in there, and there's a few tick boxes that you can tick if you want to know more, if you want to find out more about the church, or you can fill a little bit in if you've got any other questions. And also they've said the Why Jesus booklet, if you've listened this morning and you've got questions, you want to know more about who this person Jesus is that we've been talking about, then I'd encourage you to take that and read it, and then come back and ask more questions.